Hello everyone. What I want to do is I want to make a tutorial here to show you how to the complete process to use this in VMware. Now I have VMware Workstation, however this will work in VMware Player, the free edition, almost identical. There are a couple of things that maybe the interface looks just slightly different, but its settings, everything is the same. What I'm going to do here is install Windows 2008 Server R2 or Release 2, make it to where that it'll deploy the services plus be able to connect an internal network by using LAN segmenting, so that it'll identify and be able to communicate together in the virtual world. So let's get started. So first things first, what I want to do is I want to go to File here. If you guys can't see that, make it so you guys can see it here. Go to File, and I want to go to New Virtual Machine, and I'm going to select Custom, and I'll click next on it and just kind of go through all the screens. But however, refuse the urge to go ahead and set the ISO up at this current point. This is again a way to streamline this and make this the most reliable way, and this is one of the best ways I've found to do this. So make sure you say I will install an operating system later. Click next on it. You want to go ahead and select that we're going to install Windows 2008 Server R Release 2, which is also 64-bit. Click next on that. And I'll go ahead and leave this as this, and I'll just say test 2008 R2 server, just so that it's descriptive to me. And I'll click next on it. I'm going to go ahead. Now I have a core processor. I have one single processor with 4 cores in it. You probably could just get away with just doing 2 on it, but at least a minimum of 2. Okay? So that means a dual core minimum. Click next on it, and I'm going to go ahead and bump the memory up to 1000 or 2048. Whoops, 2048 on the RAM, which is good. Don't refuse to the urge to set anything up at this point. Leave the settings as they are, and we're going to change it once the virtual machine has been created. So click next on it. Click next again, and yes, you're going to create a new virtual disk. And I'm going to go ahead and leave it at SCSI, which is fine since this is a server. Click next on it. And I do want to bump it up to 140 gigs for the server version of this. Go ahead and check the spot where it says store virtual disk as a single file. Click next and finish. And what we're going to do, waiting for this to come up. Now I can go to the settings of it. Since this is a server install, I'm going to edit my virtual machine settings. And what I'm going to do with this is you'll notice that I don't have a floppy. I'm going to remove it. I don't have a sound card required for the server, and I don't have a printer in this particular case either. So, and since now I'm editing this, I can go ahead and add the ISO to install it. So I'm going to click on the CD-ROM DVD, click ISO image, click browse on it. My particular files have been contained on my desktop, and this particular one is under ISO files. And I'm going to highlight the server ISO, which is this one right here. It's GRM SXE Val English DVD. And I'll go ahead and click OK on that. And I'm going to I'm going to go back and set one more setting on this. We need to create a LAN segment. So a LAN segment so they can communicate in between each other. And I can add as many as I want to this LAN segment, but I've got to set these up custom. So I'm going to go to LAN segment and then click LAN segments. You notice I've already created one in here. I'm just going to create another one, and I'm going to call this test 1 server, and click OK on that LAN segment, and then I'm going to select that LAN segment there. So you can have different ones if you want to do other ones as well. So I'm going to go ahead and click this one, test 1 server. And since I've added my ISO, yes I have, as soon as I click OK, and I'm going to start up my virtual machine. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll pause through this until it finishes, and then we'll come back at that point, okay? Let it get started here so you can see the options that I pick. And then once it's done, I'll come back. Waiting for it to boot up. You know that everything's working correctly once this boots up. It's just about there. Click on next. Install now. just about there. And I want to click on Enterprise Server Full Installation. Click Next on it. And I'm going to select Accept License Terms. Click Next on it. Also select the Custom option there. And I don't need to do anything in here. I'm just going to click Next and let it begin installing it. And what I'll do is I'll pause this and we'll come back. Looks like it's just about done. Might need one more reboot though. Looks like it might be the last time it needs to restart. Should be done after this. Let's see. Looking good so far. Alright, let's go ahead and continue here now. Let's go ahead and enter a password in. I'm going to put the one in here I normally do. Alright, looks like we're going to be able to start it up. And we want to do two things, and then we're going to start with our first restart. You want to make sure that you follow along exactly along with this video to make this work correctly. If you defer from it, then you're on your own. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and click this. I finished installing it inside VMware, so I don't have to worry about that anymore. And I'm just kind of waiting for this last little connection here. Alright, so I'm going to turn this off. I don't need this initial configuration tasks window. I'm going to close that down, and I check the box so it doesn't come on anymore. Now the server manager will come up. And now that the server... And I'm going to go ahead. We need to go ahead and configure the server here. So you notice this name, it's an unfriendly name. It would be really hard for it to be able to remember that. But first things first, I need to set an IP address on it. So what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to go to right here where it says network connections, highlight the network card, right click on it, go to properties, and I'm going to turn off IPv6 and then go to my IPv4 and properties. I'm just going to use a class A network. You can pretty much make whatever IP address you want. I would suggest that you create the one I'm doing. That way, that way you know how to make it work. And you notice that I put the DNS here. The first DNS is the server because we are setting this up as a primary domain controller to begin with. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK on that and click on that as well. Close out of my settings window here, and I want to go back to change system properties, and let's go ahead and change the computer name now, because if you notice that this computer name is extremely unfriendly, it's very hard to remember that. So I'm going to go to change it. I'm going to call it test server. Easy enough to remember. Okay, and it will ask me to restart the computer, and so that you don't have any failure in adding any services, you must restart it now. And we'll wait for that to reboot here, which it is. Yeah, we're almost there. Alright, let's send a Control-Alt-Delete by selecting, if you guys didn't know, this little symbol here is to send a Control-Alt-Delete inside of VMware. Let me move this back now, put my password in, and let's go ahead and start installing the Active Directory would be the first thing you need to install. It's going to add DNS in there, so we should all make that good. It's going to fire up our server manager, is going to come up again. And I'm waiting for that to come up, and I'm going to go ahead and activate installing the Active Directory for domains first. And since it didn't start, yes, it is starting right now. You can see it coming up. There we go. And we changed our server's name to test server. Let's go ahead and add our first role, which is going to be the domains. And I'm going to highlight roles, and then I'm going to click on add roles. And I'm going to skip this screen so that I don't get bothered with it anymore. Click next on it, and I'm going to highlight where it says Active Directory for Domain Services and check that box. Add required install. Click next and install it. Now we're just waiting for that to install, and then we're going to go ahead and set up the Active Directory services. During this time, you should come up with a name you want to call the domain. Otherwise, I'm going to create one myself, which will work just fine. Shouldn't be too much longer here. It's just about done. Removing some stuff out of my recycle bin there. Seems to be quite a bit. Eh, just checking to make sure that was okay to get rid of all that. And I'm going to click close on this. Go to my Active Directory services here. And once this comes up, there we go. I want to click on run the DCPROMO. DC promo is what it stands for. It's to be able to set up Active Directory services. I'm not going to use advanced, but I'm going to click next on it. And I'm going to create a new domain and a new forest. And I'm going to call this one, I don't know, let's just call it cstlab.prv. Will work for me. Click next on it. And I want to go ahead and select Windows Server 2008 R2 only environment. Let's click next on that. It's going to ask me about installing DNS, and I'm going to answer yes to this. And let's go ahead and go through it. Put my password in as before. Click next on it. Next again. And I'm going to check this little box about reboot on completion here. Makes it take a lot less time to set it up. Well, what it does is it makes it, if I'm not constantly watching it, I can look away and it'll still continue to install. And it's restarting. And this restart usually takes the longest before it completely boots up. This is usually the longest one because it finishes some of the Active Directory installing while it's booting. Just so you know, this is normal for it to take a little while. Depending on how big the hard drive is and how much RAM you have is really going to depend on how long this one step actually takes. almost done here. Like I said, this is going to be the longer boot up process. All right, looks like we're done. Let's go ahead and send another Control Delete so I can boot in. And we can get started installing the remainder of the services. Hello, hello. Test, test, test. Looks like it's going through. There it started. And let's go ahead and add, we can pretty much add all of our services all in one go now. So that we've got everything done, our IP address is set up. So let's go to the roles. Waiting for it to populate here for just a second. Let's go to add roles. And let's go ahead and add file services, DHCP, and let's add Windows deployment services all in one. Click next on it, next again, next. Next, and we're setting up our defaults on it. This is fine for right now, but we need to go back and change it later on. And I'll show you how to do that. Click next on it, click next again, and let's set up our scope right now. I call this scope Leroy 10.10.1.2. One IP address above what our network interface is. And I'll just add 10 IP addresses to this scope. We don't need that many of them. Let's click next on it as well. And I want to disable stateless mode for IPv6. Click next on it, as long as this is correct. Administrator, yes. And click next again. And next, finally, and install all the services. This is the remainder of setting up Windows 2008, including for a domain environment and also for running your deployment services as well. Later on, if you need to hook up a printer, you can add the print services as well. I'll wait for this to finish installing and I'll show how to set up the ISO for deployment services as well. Let's click OK on it, and you notice here if I open up my roles, I have all the services set up now, including DHCP. Just to check on DHCP, you notice that it is running right here, which is good. So, but you notice that our deployment server is not set up. So what I want to do is, down here in the very bottom, and if you're running Player, VMware Player, it's going to be at the top. It's going to have a little arrow up here. You click on it, and it's going to pop it over. But in this one, nevertheless, the icons look the same. I'm going to right-click on the CD-ROM icon here and go to Settings. And I'm going to find my ISO image that I have that's running the enterprise version of Windows 7. And it happens to be this one right here, which starts with 7601. And I'm going to open that and go ahead and add it as my CD-ROM icon. So now, when I highlight this and I right click on it and I go to configure, now I'm going to have that CD-ROM. I'm going to let it install it on drive C, which is not recommended, but this is for test purposes anyways. And I want to check both of these boxes, both of them together. I want to turn them both off. Alright, basically what they mean is that if there's another DHCP server on the network, and am I using it on this port, and is it listening on this port? So in this case, for what we're using on in VMware, you need to turn them both off. So I'm going to click next on that as well, and check the box where it says respond to all clients and computers and known and unknown. Click next again. And what it's doing is it's adding the image to the deployment services. Yes, here goes the final phase where it adds them into it. It's asking me where the CD-ROM is, and you notice I already mounted it. So I'm going to click OK on it. Continue, click next. Ooh. Well, looks like I grabbed the wrong image. Let me go back here again. Settings. And I need to look for the Windows. I thought this was the right one. Oh, I missed it. I hit this one instead. So it's this one right here, eval right here, which is the 7600, not the 7601. So that was my mistake. Should be mounted now. I'm going to go back and rebrowse it. Looks like it mounted it. Bring it up and highlight it again. Click next. And of course it's installing. I would recommend changing this to a customized name. That's what I just like to do for it. I'll name it as Microsoft and click next. And then finally clicking on finish. And now it's loading the image from the ISO into our deployment server so that we can send it over the network. I know it's kind of like watching paint dry, but it is going along pretty fast. Not too much longer here. Still loading. Just about done. And finished. Alright, now we got everything configured up. And let's go ahead and create our virtual machine to accept the deployment server image. So I'm going to click on File and then New Virtual Machine, Custom. And the way I want to select this is I'm going to still install the operating system later again. Click Next on it. I'm going to select this as Windows 7 32-bit. That's what I have here. And that's fine. I can just say Windows 7 32-bit test. Click Next on it. And again, don't worry about the processors because this one is 32-bit. Leave the RAM as default. Leave the network as default because you don't want to touch this just yet. Alright, go ahead and create a new virtual disk. I would select IDE in this case. Click Next on it, and then make sure you click on the button where it says Store Virtual Disk as a single file. 60 gigs is fine. Click Next, and then Finish. And then once it configures, once it's saved as a virtual machine, then go back and edit the settings. And let's do cleanup on the house on it. So we don't want to install a printer right now. We don't want to install a sound card. We don't need to install a floppy drive in it either. So all we want to do is change this network setting to LAN segment, and as we selected before, was test one server. Now, as soon as I click OK on it, and I start this one up, whoops, and I click on power to start it up, it's going to want to boot over the network from inside by default. And waiting here, hitting F12 to start up, and there we go. Our deployment server is now engaging in the operating system, and it is loading it now. It is now detecting it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and let this start up so you guys can see that it works. And I will continue with another tutorial after this is done to make one where we're going to do the deployment services, or I'm sorry, where we're going to do capturing of the image. You notice that it's booting up here. I just want to show you that it all works and how to log into it at this point. And you see that it's booting up, no problems over the network. Took an IP address. Alright, let's click next on. It's going to ask me for a username and password. And remember, we called it, I need to look at my domain here. What do we call it? Click on my server manager here. So I called it test server. Oh, I called it cstlab.prv. So all I need to do is put in cstlab backslash administrator. Okay. And then let's put in our password. And if you've entered your information correctly, you click OK. It's going to let me log right in, which it did. And I'll continue. Click next on it to continue all the way through, accepting the defaults. And now you'll know that everything is set up. So I'm going to go ahead and end our tutorial there. So you have the whole process down pat. And I'm going to make a secondary tutorial on how to do the image capturing process through the Microsoft line. Thank you for joining us. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye now.